Good afternoon. I'm Dennis Galucki. Welcome to the 452nd Imagine Greater Buffalo program and 74th virtual Imagine lecture hosted by our wonderful and imagineful Buffalo and Erie County Public Library System. Thank you so much for joining us today. This program is created by the Center for the Study of Art, Architecture, History, and Nature, or C-SAAHN as I pronounce the acronym, and ImagineLifelongLearning.com. C-SAAHN's mission is to explore life's ancient aesthetic values, beauty, truth, goodness, justice, and the pursuit of happiness rooted in place-based lifelong learning. Now, we're going to start with our speakers shortly, but first, a little housekeeping. Everyone watching will be muted during our speakers' presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can. This program is being recorded. You'll be able to watch it again later on the Downtown Central Library's Facebook page and YouTube channels, and we hope you share the link with your friends and networks. Now, let's get to our featured speakers, Jessie Fisher and Mark Mortenson. First, let's start with Mark. He's the newly announced president and CEO of the Buffalo and Erie County Botanical Gardens. Known well in our community as a strong cultural leader, Mark has served as president of the landmark Richardson Olmsted Campus and the Lipsey Architecture Center, Buffalo. He is also the former president of the Buffalo Museum of Science and Tift Nature Preserve, as well as the former CFO of the Arc of Erie County. Jessie Fisher brings a wide background to her role as the executive director of Preservation Buffalo Niagara. As an urban planner, Jessie has worked as an historic preservation and neighborhood planning consultant and developed a unique sense of how promoting our region's heritage can unlock a brighter, more equitable, and sustainable future. So let's now welcome Mark Mortenson and Jessie Fisher, who will discuss the importance of historic preservation. Mark, Jessie, take it away.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. William Murtaugh, who is the very first president or the first keeper of the National Register of Historic Places, once said that at its best, preservation engages the past in a conversation with the present over a mutual concern for the future. In Buffalo, this is especially true. Since historic preservation is one of our largest points of economic development, having brought over $1 billion of private investment to Western New York, with another $500 million in the immediate pipeline, understanding historic preservation is critical for understanding the present and future economic life of our region. Additionally, as we grapple with our legacies of redlining and racism, of exclusion and stagnant power structures, digging into how and why our present city is shaped the way that it is are key components to building a place where everyone can be included and where everyone can thrive. Mark, if you want to go forward one. So why Buffalo? From the 1840s on, virtually every style of Western architecture and every trend in American city planning can be seen in Buffalo. I often refer to the city as a 40 square mile outdoor museum of architecture and of urbanism. And I'm not the only one. Just yesterday, Architectural Digest came out with their list of 22 places to visit in 2022. And at almost the top of the list, Buffalo. From Greek Revival to Art Deco to postmodernism and everything in between, you can find high style examples and vernacular examples, all held together by cutting edge urban planning philosophies. And so why? Why do we have all of this here in Buffalo? I think especially folks of probably my generation and younger don't always have a sense of how the city grew. And so you can almost not see this on your screen, but if you see that tiny little yellow dot all the way at the left of that chart, that was Buffalo in 1816. What happened? Well, the Erie Canal happened and we became a city at a crossroads. So many thousands and thousands of people just passed through this city and brought with them different tastes, different cultural standards, different thoughts about how to live, different architectural styles. So between this tiny little yellow speck and this red dot, which is 1844, you have a tenfold increase in the city. Again, still not a huge city in 1844, but when you think about the growth from 2,000 people to 30,000 people and how that changed every year, you can get a sense of both that transience, of that bringing together of all kinds of different cultures and styles, as well as just the sheer volume of activity that would have taken place. That fast-paced population growth really, really accelerated. So you can see this huge yellow dot in the middle is 1940. So in only 100 years, you go from this little tiny red dot to this yellow dot. The other thing that was happening, all that population growth fueled an amazing amount of wealth. So you had folks building houses, building businesses. Everyone wanted to have the very best of their kind because they had the money to do so. And you wind up with just this incredible wealth of building in all kinds of different styles. Post-World War I, and especially as you get into the post-World War II era, we have a different story because you are starting to see, even post-World War I, where you still have that population growth happening, there are some pretty massive structural changes taking place. You start to have the beginning of industry moving south and west to less unionized places with less regulation, less rules. That accelerates post-World War II. But if you read economic writings at the time, you were still starting to see it, and folks who were looking at the long-term structure of Rust Belt cities are already starting to see the signs that while you still have population growth being fueled, especially by wealth and then the baby boom, all those kinds of things, some of those structural changes are already starting to take place. However, Buffalo was also on the cutting edge of taking advantage of all kinds of federal programs that were starting to happen. So really in the 1920s, you start to see the birth of reform movements in terms of how people are living in cities in very crowded conditions, in conditions that are considered less than sanitary. And you have an entire industry built up around how do we reform housing. And you actually have a couple of really interesting women at the forefront of that movement, Edith Elmer Woods and Catherine Bauer. And they do a ton of research and end up influencing FDR in terms of federal housing policy, especially in terms of public housing. Buffalo was a huge early adopter. We had 4 publicly funded housing projects in the city of Buffalo by 1940, either built or under construction, and that far outpaced a lot of other cities. So we were really early adopters there. In addition, some of you might know about the Model Cities program, which was kind of an answer to those kinds of early projects, which were kind of level existing neighborhoods and build them up through new architectural standards. The Model City program really comes in and tries to just improve existing conditions in neighborhoods with the folks that are there. And then you have these kind of what I'll refer to as neoliberal federal spending policies really begun by Nixon in a way to kind of decentralize spending. In New York State, you have Rockefeller also putting a lot of money in that. So really interesting things are also happening all the way up through the 70s in terms of the shoreline apartments, waterfront school. So you wind up, because of all these federal programs, of still having a lot of capital that is going to some pretty big name architects. So really, even though we stopped having that necessarily wealth as a city and that population growth, we're still a hotbed of architectural innovation. And so we still end up all the way through the current era with some really incredible examples of high style architecture and high style architects. I'm going to turn things over to Mark now.
Yeah, so I certainly credit my colleague Jessie Fisher with bringing this exhibit to the table. So Jessie was aware of work that was done by Henry Russell Hitchcock and the different presentations, the exhibitions that he had at the Albright Knox back in the 1940s and then reprised in the 1980s. And so again, to her credit, she brought the partners around the table to say, this would be a great collaborative partnership with some wonderful cultural organizations to really speak to the diversity of architecture in our region and really use that Henry Russell Hitchcock information as the backdrop and the foundation for this presentation. And it was great. Everyone was, was part of it. We all were very happy to participate. And as we went along in the planning, I think we came to our own level of understanding, certainly guided by Jessie in the sense of Hitchcock's work, and certainly no criticism, but Hitchcock's work largely focused on Delaware Avenue and the largest and brightest buildings down to the grain elevators, which is a very, very small segment of our city. And we didn't really truly, his work really didn't truly celebrate the diversity of our city, not just in the form of the buildings, but their functions, as well as individuals and minorities that weren't represented at all. And so that was a focus, and as we walk through the slides, you'll see that we really wanted to bring to the table that we do have a wide array of diversity in the lenses exhibit. So the prompts that we wanted to bring to in this exhibit and some of the pictures that we have is we've lost a lot of architectural fabric in our community, and we grieve about that. And we really want to demonstrate through this exhibit why we should not lose that fabric anymore and the importance of keeping and retaining that fabric. Again, we talk about the breadth of the architectural resources that we have, and certainly dear to both Jessie's heart and my heart is preserving the architectural fabric that we have. And finally, really to bring about more of those stories of diversity to the table as it relates to architecture and the architecture that we have in our community. So I'm going through the next few slides. This is really just a visual walkthrough of the exhibit. The exhibit is at the Lipsey Architecture Center, Buffalo, which is on the lower level of the Towers building at the Richardson Olmsted campus. And this is essentially what you see when you walk in. In the gallery off to the right-hand side, you're greeted with some sepia-colored original photographs from Henry Russell Hitchcock's 1940s exhibition that was presented at the Albright Knox. Many of the photos that you see here are buildings that no longer exist. In particular, that one that's almost in the center on the top is actually the former public library, which quite honestly is one of my favorite buildings in Buffalo that is no longer here. We then go into the gallery and we present some imagery from the 1980s exhibition. Again, some of those buildings are no longer here, but we wanted to have some physical elements from those exhibitions to present in the first gallery. And on the opposite side, we essentially present Hitchcock's photographic material in time frame context so that people can see, as Jessie was discussing, the growth of the community over time. We use those in a very illustrative way. In the gallery, we also have a television monitor that has all of the original digital images that Hitchcock used in the exhibition, as many as we have digitally, and also the content that describes those images in buildings.
So as Mark said, we really wanted to, though, move beyond the work that Hitchcock had originally presented. You'll see when you come into this exhibit that we did map all of the original. It's about 120 buildings that Hitchcock selected. And if you look at them mapped, you'll see that there's a very geographic area that he focuses in on, which is, for the most part, as Mark said, along through downtown, along the Delaware Avenue spine up into the Parkside neighborhood, and then includes some industrial buildings, which he speaks very highly of in Buffalo in terms of both the grain elevators as well as some more factory type buildings. In addition to including the Larkin Administration Building in the original 1940 exhibit, he also does include the Larkin Warehouse as a really fine example. And of course, we do still have the Larkin Warehouse. So But when you start to look at, well, what is the city of Buffalo, you see how very little of it is represented in this type of architectural exhibit, and how few of the places of importance to other folks who don't necessarily interact with that sort of Delaware Avenue downtown corridor were bothered to be tapped for inclusion. You also have one woman included in the entire exhibit. She wasn't an architect, she was a homeowner. You have no people of color mentioned at all in the exhibit. And certainly you don't have any references to any LGBTQ history or places of importance. So we really wanted to both respect the work that Henry Russell Hitchcock did as a premier architectural critic and writer, but we also wanted to look beyond Henry Russell Hitchcock. So that's the focus of the second room in the exhibit that you'll see. And so we worked on that section with Dr. Charles Davis from the University of Buffalo School of Architecture. He's a professor of art history and architectural criticism. He's written some really wonderful books that I highly recommend people look into if they're interested in this type of pushing sort of beyond the current canon. And so Dr. Davis and one of his classes last year actually really helped us deconstruct that Hitchcock-based architectural canon. We came up with, and you'll see them literally written on the walls in here, 3 new principles to guide architecture that go beyond what Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson had set up as 3 principles of international style architecture. Using that work, we look at, if you applied a different set of principles, a different lens, if you will, to the architectural canon, what other buildings would you come up with, and what other placemakers and city builders would you come up with? And so those are all displayed in this room of the gallery. In addition, you can see the screen kind of glowing in the back there. We worked with an intern to map every demolition on the east side of Buffalo from 1950 to the present day. It's about 36,000 buildings. And we run that animation on a loop so you can sort of watch the decimation of the east side from a built environment perspective. It's pretty powerful. Recommend spending a little bit of time on that. And then finally, in the center of this gallery room, you'll see this large scale model of the Humboldt Parkway section of the city of Buffalo, including the Hamlin Park Historic District. And you may have heard in the news recently about efforts to cover the Route 33 to bring back some aspects of the Humboldt Parkway and reconnect Hamlin Park and some other East Side neighborhoods. And that there's a model of that proposal that some UB students made about 10 years ago, and that's on display here in the exhibit. And it's really great way to visually see what's being presented to that group. So we're really indebted to Dr. Charles Davis, as well as UB School of Architecture generally, in supporting this work that we use to try to push beyond that original architectural canon and think about what a new canon for the city of Buffalo could be.
So we just, again, to recap the Lenses exhibit, it's being presented through April the 10th at the Lipsey Architecture Center, which is again in the lower level of the Towers building at the Richardson Olmsted campus, located at 444 Forest Avenue. It's a place you just can't visually miss. Our hours for March and April are Friday, Saturday, 10 to 4, and Sunday, noon to 4. There was some unplanned construction that we have going on, so don't be discouraged. The exhibit is open during these times, even if it looks like a little bit of a construction zone out there. We still have people there ready and willing to speak to you about the exhibit. We also wanted to finalize the exhibit with the speaker series. And you see here that we have a speaker series. These are hosted at the Buffalo History Museum on Thursday nights. Is that from 6 to 7, Jessie?
Yes.
Yeah, from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. And it's culminating with a talk by Donovan Ripkema, and we'll talk a little bit more about him later. We also have captured this Lenses exhibit in a website We're still working on finalizing that, and it will be live soon. But for anyone who missed it, we will still have the ability for them to review the content and the information, continue to promote the diversity of the architecture in our community. That's the lenses exhibit, and we also wanted to talk to you about another initiative that we're working on. But Jessie, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about this quote from Henry Russell Hitchcock. I know it's one of your favorites.
Yeah, well, we'll let everyone read it on the screen. I think we're getting close to our allotted time, so maybe we should skip to the place economics study. But please come to the exhibit, and then you'll be able to read that quote in big letters up on the wall. One of the things that Henry Russell Hitchcock talks about is not just the importance of individual buildings, but the importance of planning and the importance of having policies that support good planning. And so one of the things that Mark and I were able to do with this exhibit was to actually fundraise for a study by an organization called Place Economics. I don't know, Mark, if you want to advance that, which is a consulting firm that looks at the benefits of historic preservation to individual communities so that they can have, instead of just talking generally about the benefits of preservation, individual communities can talk about what preservation has actually meant to their community. So they've been doing this for about 30 years. You can Google them. They've done studies for Los Angeles, Saratoga Springs, San Antonio, Baltimore, pretty much any city that has a pretty advanced preservation program has used place economics to look at what are the impacts of preservation in their community. So we asked the place economics team to look at a few things that we think are, really important to Buffalonians and to Western New Yorkers, which is the impact on jobs and job creation that preservation has had in our communities, the impact on neighborhood quality of life, which will include diversity and affordability, and some of those kinds of aspects. And then some of the regional and cultural heritage tourism, which again, some of us kind of know because we're in this world, the impact that, for instance, the Darwin Martin House has had. But what are some of those other impacts, and how do we continue to make sure that we're, that our policies are continuing to drive that kind of benefit to the city of Buffalo? So the team will be here. The first site visit is coming up really quickly in late March. The team wants to see every single historic district in the city of Buffalo. So we'll be doing a couple of days of tours with them, some key stakeholder meetings, and they've already actually started their data collection. So they're going to use this as an opportunity to start looking at what they have. They'll come back in May, and just a little plug for PBN's Preservation Awards this year, which will be May 19th at the Great Batch Pavilion at the Darwin Martin House. Donovan Ripkema will be our keynote speaker, and he'll have some initial observations on Buffalo to share with us at that point. So that's a sneak peek for those of you who are interested. And then the final report and presentation will come this summer in June. We'll actually have that data available to share. And if Mark advances to the next slide, what we're hoping to do with that is use this document to make sure that local policy and New York State policy is really able to keep up with what we know to be the benefits of preservation. So we know that we do need some reforms in some of our policy. We're hoping that this report will help us to build the case that those are important things to do, not back burner items. And then we're also hoping to use the report to just bring more people into an understanding of what historic preservation is. It's not all house museums and trying to keep everything exactly the same. It really is about livability and quality of life and connecting to each other. So we hope that this report will help us demonstrate that in maybe more tangible ways for those people who aren't maybe as immersed in this world as folks like Mark and I are. So we're excited about that.
Well, great presentation. Thank you very much, Jessie, Mark. Let's see if we're going to get some questions, but you've really shown an outline, and I can't emphasize enough while those questions come in. Write them into the chat box, folks, and Melissa will gather them. But that wooden model that was created some years ago by the School of Architecture is something to be seen on its own terms and just spend some time with. It's accurate through today and really gives you a glimpse. Mark, you I think were involved with that when you were the involved executive director over at the Science Museum, because that's at the core of the renovation potential that'll happen if that 33 gets capped over. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the Science Museum was part of a coalition called the Restore Our Community Coalition, which is still a very active coalition. Hamlin Park Taxpayers Association is probably one of the most strongest advocates on that committee in conjunction with Olmsted Parks and other culturals and neighborhood organizations. But as many people will remember, the Science Museum was housed at the terminus of what was the Humboldt Parkway, and we've always had a special connection to Humboldt Parkway, and that connection was severed when the 33 was put in. And certainly we feel it's as much as our heritage, then when I was at the Science Museums, as it was the Olmsted and the city for that matter, because it made putting that in made significant changes in the landscape and the fabric. It separated the community. Many on the east side of Buffalo refer to it as the scar. They blame it for environmental pollution. They blame it for many health benefits that individuals on the east side of town are having. And certainly they blame it for the economic disparities that are happening on that side of town. So there were a tremendous amount of social and economic impacts when that went in. It was not just simply, let's put in a great avenue to get people downtown. So I know that certainly the more recent announcement from Governor Hochul about having funds in order to attribute to decking over that would really be a great step to heal the community. And the model that you mentioned, Dennis, is certainly a sight to be beheld, and also demonstrates at that point in time what the thought process was to deck over a portion of the expressway.
Right, and the proposals that I've seen go from East Ferry to Best Street, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct, yep.
Yeah, it really makes a difference. All right, Melissa, do we have any questions?
Yes. So first question is just a quick one. Can you repeat the name of the organization that will conduct that study beginning in late March?
They're called Place Economics.
And Dennis, I think this is more of a question for you, but is this the same exhibit that was mentioned on a previous Tuesday about Hitchcock? This person thought it was at Buff State, but you never mentioned where on the campus it was to visit. So.
Good point. Well, pull into the main drive across from the Albright Knox Art Gallery and go just a couple football lengths, if that, and then you'll see a sign for the entrance to the Richardson complex. And just follow a winding road. Parking is available right there, but it's the Buffalo State side of the Richardson complex. And that's about the best directions I can give. Mark, maybe you can add.
Yeah, so it's in the historic Richardson buildings. In fact, more specifically, it's in the historic Towers building, the one that you can't miss with the big copper roof on it, and that is facing the Buffalo State College side. So if you came in Rockwell Road, you would just come to the second stop sign and make a left, and you would enter the campus there. And again, you can't just keep on following the towers and you'll be good to go.
And another question, one important aspect of preservation not discussed, the sustainability component. Could you speak to that?
Good
Sure.
question.
I think we could definitely do a whole, not that I'm signing myself up for more work here, Dennis, but we could definitely do a whole talk on the nexus between sustainability and historic preservation. But a couple quick points. The construction and demolition industries are responsible for about 25% of fossil fuels or of carbon emissions in the world. So every time we're tearing down a building or building a building that we don't need to, instead of repurposing something, we're having an incredible environmental impact. So reusing the buildings that we have is always the more sustainable Avenue. Also, about 40% of municipal solid waste streams in the United States are demolition and construction debris. So again, there's a real nexus between sustainability and preservation. We didn't really talk about that today, but I think we would need the full 20 minutes to really do that subject justice.
We're whetting people's appetite for future programs, Jesse. How's that? But we really have pointed to sustainability, and I come to the conclusion that preservation is a cornerstone of any sustainability discussion. It's just, as you pointed out, a major part. We don't often think of it. We think of energy and all the usual suspects, but just figuring a way to preserve what we have would go a long way and should be discussed.
Yeah, I mean, energy use, building energy usage, you know, the sort of lifetime of energy usage is only about 25% of the energy it takes for a building. And most of the energy usage in a building is actually at the construction level. So it's great that we do things that make either existing buildings or new buildings more energy efficient. But if you're tearing down a whole bunch of stuff to do that, you're never going to make up the energy usage that you spent just in terms of what we can do with energy efficiency in building usage.
And many of these buildings were built to last. Again, we're here with 150 years under our belt. We don't look a day past 25, mind you. But, you know, this building has suffered neglect, and it is still very watertight, even with all of, you know, kind of the intrusion and everything that's happened. So what you have is you have these buildings that are built to last, and then you have, and I'm sorry for the criticism, you have more contemporary buildings that are really disposable structures. So I think that's where it also gets into sustainability. It's just like if you look at the lifetime of a building, of historic building like the Richardson that was built to last, and you compare that to other buildings that would be torn down and erected and torn down and erected, that in itself talks to the sustainability factor of these historic structures. And again, a testament as to why the money should be invested to extend that sustainability.
Good. Melissa, any other last questions?
We do not have any more questions.
Well, our timing is pretty good. We're in great shape. I can't emphasize it enough, folks. This is an exhibit that you will regret missing if you don't go to it. It's as simple as that. There's volunteers from different organizations. Maybe you want to just mention that, Jesse, that they're from the History Museum and elsewhere. They're there on these days and hours. Don't worry about COVID. Because there's it's a small space, but you're going to feel very comfortable in the space, and it's a beautiful, literally beautiful interior space that's worth seeing on its own terms, let alone the exhibit that happens to be there. So,
and Dennis, a quick shout out to our volunteers who have really helped with this exhibit, and our staff that has helped with this exhibit. You know, some of our organizations are very small organizations, and we couldn't do this work without a very dedicated and passionate volunteer and docent cadre. And so we're so thankful to have the passion of those teams and the community. And really what we're really trying to do is inspire more and more passion towards historic preservation, so that Jesse does not have to stay awake 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
There you go. And technically, this is the first exhibit as part of the Lipsey Architecture Center in Buffalo. So that's worth historic exhibit number one. If you want to participate, this is your chance. It's through April 10th, folks. Put it in your calendar and do it. All right, we're going to thank you both for a great presentation. Mark, Jesse, Mark, we're going to wish you well too on your new position at the Botanical Gardens. You're literally making the cultural tour here in Buffalo, and we're very grateful that you're here to serve the community as you do with your skill set. So, and Jesse will continue to work work together as we do future programs. So, and folks, I'll remind you all to, if you're interested in preservation, let people know your thoughts on the Great Northern. Saving it is a major issue going on right now, and it should be, well, we should make sure we don't just reward demolition by neglect, and go backwards instead of forwards in preservation. We've taken many great strides. Let's keep that momentum going. And much of it thanks to Preservation Buffalo Niagara, continuing efforts. So thanks for folks for joining us today. We hope to see you back here again next Tuesday, March 15th on Zoom, as we are joined by Melissa Brown from the Buffalo History Museum. I'm Dennis Galucki. Be well and good day.